to season 10 of Changing the Game, elevated branding, building a brand that speaks, spreads, and stands out. If you missed any of our previous seasons, which is crazy to think we're on season 10, you can find all of those on our YouTube channel, Playmaker Coach. And there's a specific playlist dedicated to NM called NM Marketing Playmakers. So feel free to check that out. We'll put the replays on there if you missed any of the rest of this season, as well as, like I said, all the fantastic advisors that have shared their expertise and their tips for your success on our playlist. So I'm your host, Jennifer Hensley with Playmaker Coaching and Consulting. And with over 2 decades of working with NM advisors, excited to continue to share with you the things that other advisors have had success with that you can apply to your practice to create that winning system to help you stay in offense, score more ideal clients, and create more raving fans. So excited to be here with Brandon Briggs, and he's going to share a little bit about just his practice and what it looks like. And then we'll get into our topic in 10 today, and can't wait to learn a little bit more about your experience. So Brandon, why don't you share with us a little bit about what your practice looks like at this stage?
Awesome. Thanks. And Jen, thanks so much for inviting me to join. Excited to spend some time with everybody here for the next 30 minutes or so. A little bit about myself. In my early 40s, I'm in Chicago, Midwest, born and raised through and through. Married to a beautiful wife, Bree. We have an 18-month-old son at home, hopefully starting for number 2 this year. So just standard, 40-year-old suburban dad at this point. I'm a career changer. So I actually spent the first 10 years of my career out of college in marketing and public relations. So by nature, I am a little bit more of a communicator. I might not be the most technical financial advisor at NM, but I think one of my strengths is overall communication. I was a client prior to becoming an advisor, like I'm assuming most of our folks are today. Didn't come through the internship program. I was a client of Northwestern Mutual starting when I was in my mid to late 20s. Wasn't my advisor's best client, but at least was smart with what I had, and got offered the career opportunity about 8.5 years ago. So I've been at Northwestern Mutual since 2017. I was in the April class of 2017. And I just kind of dove in head first and really subscribed to just a blind leap of faith and just subscribing to Granum, and just got off to a really fast start. I've always been a pretty high activity, high production advisor, even from day one. I think coming out of my training class, my mentality was, pardon my French, I don't really give a crap what Granum says I need to be doing. My thought was, all right, between the times that I could work based on my responsibilities, at the time it was 8 a.m. to about 6 p.m. I didn't care about how many referrals I should get or how many meetings I should take based on Granum. My mentality is, how many can I take? How many can I get? So I just had more of that abundance mentality, and that just really helped me develop some really good habits early on. I think we averaged about 35 or 40 fact finders a month in my first year or two, got a ton of referrals, ton of points. So just was an activity junkie. And that's just allowed my production to come out of the gate pretty fast. There's been years I've written over 100 clients. There's years that I've written over 200 lives. Right now, where we're at, about 8 years in, we average about 55 to 60 new clients every single year still. We truly still believe in new client acquisition. We float around 150 to 175 lives a year. And usually we're somewhere between 500 to 750 of premium. We've hit forum before. We are a 2-star Pathfinder, so still growing the asset side of the business a little bit. And right now, our practice primarily now at our stage, we primarily focus on working with big law attorneys on their financial planning all across the country. So I started out as more of a generalist, helping anybody, and I will still help anybody, but we know that our niche is really working in the attorney market.
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that will feel the same way, that while we always talk about, and you probably understand that too from the marketing perspective, getting niche, most of us don't start there. We'll start with let's just get started however we can. Now, what does your team look like? What kind of support do you have? I don't know if you mentioned that.
I did not. Sorry about that. So we're still I'm pretty much just a sole business owner at this point. I have not ensembled, I've not partnered with anybody, and my team is relatively lean. I currently have 2 full-time staff members. So we have one AFR. So I call him my director of operations. He just handles all things logistic on my team. And my second full-time staff is what I've referred to as my business development director. He helps on all of my, prospecting, feed listing, social media, marketing events. He does a lot of our team's outreach. One of his job duties is make sure my calendar is always full. So just 2 full-time team members myself. I'm the only one on our team selling. And then I also, though, tap in here in Chicago office. We have a lot of really good shared services. So I pay out of pocket for some shared services to run all of our illustrations and our proposals and our PXs. We have an insurance service that just does all of our applications and underwriting. We have an investment shared service that does all of our account openings and servicing. So tapping into some shared services, but have 2 dedicated team members.
Okay, thanks for adding that. And as we were talking before, we were talking about, there's so many different ways that you can build it now, that while a lot of people are going the group way, there's a lot of other options that are available that can still be a great fit for you, depending on what your goals are. And you've been able to build a lot of consistency in your practice. That is really the key, I think, ultimately for that long-term success. So we want to get into our topic in 10, then we'll open up, if we have anybody with us, to some questions and some resources to help take you and take the ideas we talked about and implement those in your practice. So one of the ways to elevate your brand, that some people may not think about, is to help spread your message through other people, which is a lot of what you and I were talking about, is why we wanted to have this conversation, is because especially early on, you did so much to leverage other people with the lean teen and everything. How do I grow this? How do I reach more people through some key relationships, and joint work being part of that? So some people may be thinking more about joint work, that it's not really a marketing strategy, but for you, I think it really has been. Can you talk a little bit more about that and your philosophy around joint work?
Yeah, I think joint work is amazing. I think that any new advisor should over-index on joint work. What I always tell people in our coaching business that I have is, coming out of training, when you're first starting out, obviously you should be doing the majority, if not all, joint work. And when you feel that internal feeling of like, hey, I think I'm ready to starting to do stuff on my own. When you get that feeling, I think you should still do all joint work for at least another 3 months after that. I can't stress enough how important I believe joint work is. Now, I think there's some ways to be intentional around joint work. I think how you approach your joint work strategy, both up and down, is very, very crucial, especially early on. Thinking about joint work up, one of my core beliefs when I was doing a lot of joint work up early on and still now is I encourage people to only really, and this might not be popular, I don't know if a lot of people at NM talk like this, but I don't really subscribe to the thought of, hey, just do joint work with a bunch of different advisors in your office, get a feel for every single person, like their personality. I might be a little bit more brass tacks, but because we don't get paid for our time here, it's very easy to play office a lot and come in and, sit in a cubicle or an office, but we really only impact more people and we get compensated based on people moving forward in action. So when it comes to joint work up, we only focus really on working with joint work partners that are at the top of the production reports, right? Because I know that if somebody's at the top of the production reports, not only do they know what they're doing, but they usually are the advisors that are very organized. They already have really good systems and processes and teams in place that you can tap into. They work with urgency and they know how to connect with the prospects to really move them to action very quickly. Now, the catch-22 is usually the people on the top of the production reports have the calendars that are full furthest in advance. So you have to build a relationship with those folks. One of the things that I did when I was younger, and I still recommend some, under 5 advisors do, is just find like 2, maybe 3 more tenured advisors that you really want to emulate their practice, their systems, and just do joint work with those 2 or 3 people over and over and over and over again. It allows you to really kind of mimic and emulate those types of advisors. From a joint work down standpoint, because as you start to produce a little bit more, sit in the seat a little bit longer, you'll start to get joint work opportunities brought to you. I think there is a false sense of production or productivity, I should say, just by having a full calendar. Well, there's a lot of times I see advisors between 2 to 5, 2 to 7 years that have a full calendar, but they're doing a ton of joint work down with college reps or new reps. And it's just a lot of more inflated meetings kept in fact finder numbers. And there's just not a lot of opportunity there. So joint work down, it's important to say no more than you say yes. And I believe it's important to have, really stick to your minimum required or minimum acceptable prospect there. And then the last thing I always talk about on joint work, I think this is pretty much overlooked a lot, is at a certain stage in the business, I wouldn't say in your first year or two, but like for myself at 8.5 years in, I think there's a lot of value that can be had between peer-to-peer joint work, which I don't know is talked about a lot. But if I can do joint work with somebody that's another 7 or 8 or a 9-year rep who's in the same trenches that I'm in, there's just a lot of one-liners and language and systems that I can kind of beg, borrow, and steal from that person. So I just think that is, those are the 3 areas of joint work. And then the last strategy would be, when you are doing joint work up or down, if that prospect reschedules or no-shows that meeting, there's about a 30 to 60 minutes on your calendar that is now free. If I'm the joint work up rep, I want to make sure that I'm giving the joint work down rep who brought that meeting to me some of my time. Say, hey, Jen, I know that we have to reschedule this, or this person no-showed. I have some time. Is there anything that I can help you with right now? I think it's important to give back a little bit. Or if you're the joint work down rep bringing it up, use that opportunity to pick your joint work up partner's brain on anything that they can provide you value on too.
I think that's great, especially that perspective of, hey, you already had that time set aside. So be intentional, take advantage of that from both perspectives. And when you talk about, that relationship with a joint work, part of the things I think about from a marketing perspective too is it's kind of like your internal center of influence. It's the same kind of thing, but you're just building that with your internal business partners that you really want to grow with. So think about, like you said, who are those people that you really want to be intentional about nurturing that relationship? And even so much so sometimes that, if you're sending a gift, a holiday gift to your best client, you might think about that at some point to your best joint work partners and do the same thing. Have you had any experience with that yourself?
Yeah, early on, one of my 3 people that I intentionally did joint work on almost exclusively the first 2 or 3 years of my practice, there was one of our guys that I was on his small list of holiday mailers, and he sent stuff to me and my fiance at the time because I brought him so much business, and now we have reciprocated that as joint work up partners. There's a guy in our office that has brought me a lot of joint work. He's a really, really good up and coming advisor. His head is in the right spot. He brought me a lot of good attorneys that he's called on. And him and his wife just had their baby, and my wife and I made sure we reached out and sent out a nice, newborn gift to them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think the beautiful thing is you're in Northwestern Mutual where so many people want to give back and are willing to give part of their time. But like you said, this is something that you are paid for your time and to be in front of people and growing your business. So while you're each your own business owner, think about how you can treat those relationships that you want to continue to grow and nurture in that space. So tell us a little bit more about, practical strategy. As some people maybe, like you said, are doing joint work, but have some opportunity to be more strategic around that and make that more mutually beneficial. What are some other suggestions that you might have in that space?
Yeah, I think I just think the word intention always just comes to mind on this. Is like, if you're really only working with those 2 or 3 other advisors, you can really have it be mutually beneficial and really almost become an unofficial ensemble, an unofficial partnership of that person's team. You get to tap into and leverage time by tapping into that other joint work person's staff and their team to do all the paperwork, the underwriting, the account openings, the servicing, freeing more time up for you to go prospect and bring that joint work partner more business. And I think on the joint work downside, again, I cannot stress enough the missed opportunities of being able to pour into that next generation advisor who's just coming up right behind you and really taking the time and saying, hey, Jen, again, I know that John had to reschedule today, um, but what are you struggling with? What can I help you with? What can I, dive a little bit deeper and almost treat it like a little mini mentoring or coaching session in that time. I just think that the more that you can think of it as a partnership and less a transaction, the more beneficial it's going to be for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's great perspective, and where most of it starts, right? Is the activity is what we control, but we have to have the mindset to really be successful with it as well.
Yep.
So we always want to make sure that we're giving everybody some practical we call it try it at work tips. One thing in the next 2 weeks, based off all the great insights you've already shared, and then we'll talk about some questions from our participants and everything. Where would you suggest they get started? What's the 101 from our conversation today?
One thing relevant to joint work would be, if you haven't already, to really sit down in your local network office and look at the most recent weekly or monthly production report that was sent out. Here in the Northwestern Mutual Chicago office, it's sent out weekly as well as a larger monthly snapshot. The larger monthly snapshot is broken down by 10+ year advisors, 5 to 10 year advisors, and then under 5 advisors. And sit down with those reports and really do some self-reflection. Say, hey, am I really doing joint work with the most strategic partners possible? And again, not to be callous, but the numbers will always speak for themselves in this industry, and really identify who are those 1, 2, or 3 people that I can always bring joint work to, and just have that small little cohort, if you will. That's just an immediately actionable thing that I'd recommend around joint work.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. And even if you don't have it, right? Or you're like, oh, I think I have it. It's always a good idea probably to come back to that periodically, because I'm sure
right,
some of those partners that you had at one point, and
right,
that's evolved for you over the course of your business. I
yeah.
didn't ask you, and I wanted to come back to it actually about your niche. You said now you work a lot in the legal industry. Of how did you make that evolution to go from being hey, I'm going to work with everybody, to
Mm.
I'm gonna niche down
Yeah.
and make that work for you. Can you tell a little bit more about how you've been able to be competitive, especially in that space?
I got into the working exclusively with attorneys through joint work. So I was asked to speak and do a concurrent session at the 2022 annual meeting.
Mm.
And as a result of that, a lot of younger advisors reached out to me and said, thanks for sharing. I'd love to do joint work with you. And there was an advisor, mid-20s, out in the New York office. I didn't know, but he just said, hey, look, I do a lot of work with attorneys. Do you mind if I start putting some on your calendar? I was like, great. And from there, I just got into the big law market, and I just realized, man, these are people that I can really provide a lot of value to and be extremely relevant very quickly with. And short answer, I just got into the attorney market through a joint work partner who I now have been doing a lot of joint work with over the last 2.5 years. He's pretty much an extension of our team. He just has his own contract.
Mm. So as you started to see success with that, were there some things that you found that you had to let go of, or you're like,
Mhm.
hey, I got to be okay positioning myself as I'm the expert in that space, and knowing that, like you said, you can still work with other people,
Sure.
but not necessarily market yourself as widely to everyone.
Right.
How did you navigate that? Because I think that's one of the things I hear so much from advisors. They're like, I don't want people to think I can't help them, or to
Sure.
turn people off by saying I work in this space.
I think it's just about having an abundance mentality. The way that I position it is, we are really only hunting and fishing for big law attorneys, but that doesn't mean that's the only people that will help, right? So I think as long as you kind of are able to communicate, hey, this is who I ideally know that I will be able to provide value to, but that doesn't mean that's the only person that I want to be able to provide value to. And you just are consistent with that message, the people around you should probably be able to pick up on that. So I'd like to only work with attorneys, but I tell my attorneys, look, if you have a friend or a cousin or a family member or a former colleague, even if they're not an attorney, if they're just a good person that you truly care about, that is open-minded to a conversation, I would still love to talk with them.
Mm.
And I had an attorney last week refer me to a good friend of theirs who's a dentist, right? So I don't think there's any harm in just being a very transparent communicator nowadays and just hitting people right in the middle of the forehead with what you want them to know versus feeling like you have to sugarcoat things or try to come up with some creative way to say it. Just tell people. I think people really appreciate in this virtual setting that we live in nowadays. Just hit people right in the middle of the forehead with what you want them to know.
Yeah, I think you said that in a way that's just felt very authentic and casual and stuff. It didn't feel like it was super rehearsed. I know I heard some language the other day that someone like, that who, like you said, you can ideally help, but then other people that are that you're introduced to, that you have somebody who has that relationship. They had some really great language about that too,
Yeah.
about incorporating that in. So one of the questions we have is about, you talked about continuing to do joint work. And it's kind of like I felt like it was like the opposite of hiring. Like everybody says you should hire 6 months before you think you do or whatever, right? Right before, but you said joint work, like you think you're done, you should still keep doing it. And I think for so many advisors, they feel like it's this rite of passage, right? Like I have to prove myself, like I'm capable of doing it on my own. And, there's the giving up some of that compensation that goes with it as well. And this kind of goes back to the mindset, but what advice do you have around helping people to embrace that of, you don't have to prove yourself or feel like you've got to then, do it all your own, or you've got to take all the compensation, what you've seen by going a different route and continuing to do joint work.
Well, somebody told me this, and I'll beg, borrow, and steal the one-liner because that's what we do at Northwestern Mutual. Somebody said this in my first 6 months, and it's always stuck out. And I'm assuming everyone has heard some variation of this, but I'd still much rather take 50% of a case than 100% of nothing, right? Um, and I also believe, and I tell a lot of our folks in our coaching program, that there is a significant difference between being able to run a fact finder versus being ready to run an entire financial planning relationship.
Mm.
Right. Now, a lot of times I see a lot of younger reps will say, well, I feel like I'm ready to do stuff on my own because I've listened to your fact finder, after 20 meetings together, I got your language. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference between going through that, for lack of better phrasing, the questionnaire, and then all the other stuff that comes with being a financial advisor, right? The case prep, the back end paperwork, the servicing, like there's just so much. So that's why I like to encourage people to over index a little bit longer than you would on the joint work, because you're still going to get compensated, and it allows you to really focus on, once you know the basics of the business, then to start mimicking and learning about the back end of the business. And that's why I say if somebody reschedules or no shows, it's a good opportunity to say, hey, Jen, I know that this got rescheduled, but we closed John last week. Can you bring me up to speed on like what happens now behind the scenes? What is your team doing? And use that as a learning opportunity, because running a fact finder is not the same as being ready to be a full-time end-to-end advisor for that prospect.
Well, I know for so many advisors too, or like everybody, right? They don't want to be perceived as a salesperson, but by being able to really have somebody who understands all of that art and can tie it all together in the full process, that's probably one of the best things you can do to not be perceived as a salesperson that's just trying to like figure out like, what do I say next? Or I got to ask this question, and really be able to focus on the relationship. So one of the other questions that I think this ties into what you were just talking about too, or going back to joint work and trying to get on people's calendar, establishing that relationship, like you said, so they'll give you time. What's been your experience or your advice around making sure that there's still prospecting happening? Because that's the thing I also see that sometimes comes up. Advisors are like, oh, I'm doing joint work, but then they didn't ask, and then I didn't have time, and they don't need the new introductions anymore, but I do. What's your suggestion in that space?
Well, again, if you're only working with those, like I always say, like those 2 or 3 really like narrowed in joint work partners, you will start to get into a rhythm. They will know, all right, Jen needs me to carve out 10 minutes at the end because Jen needs to get her referrals. It's just part of our process because now we're unofficial partners, right? So if you narrow it in on just those joint work partners, you can start working with that joint work partner to make sure that they know, hey, either Jen, I need you to carve out 10 minutes, or you need to kick it to me. Number one. The other thing I say to a lot of younger reps, and I'm calling the kettle black here because at one point I was a new rep doing a lot of joint work up, and that was a pain point. But now, honestly, as an 8.5-year rep, when I do joint work down, it's not a priority for me to prospect for that person, right? Just if I'm taking a truth serum here, I really think it's on the joint work down rep, the younger rep, to still own prospecting. And that could be a lot of different areas. It could be as simple as before you jump on or before the prospect jumps on the meeting and you're there with your joint work up rep waiting for the prospect, remind the joint work up rep, hey, Jen, before John jumps on today, I'm 3 referrals short of my goal this week. Can you please make sure you ask for me or kick it back to me with 5 minutes left? Like just that reminder goes a long way with the joint work up rep who's not thinking about it. Other things is, I love and appreciate when a younger rep takes ownership of the prospecting. I would love if, Jen, you came to me and said, hey, Brandon, I don't need you to prospect for me today. I want to prospect, but I need you to kick it back to me with 7 minutes left because I need to prospect today. Man, that is a no-brainer. So just taking ownership of it. If the meeting runs long, the prospect has to jump off. There's nothing wrong with the joint work down rep then reaching back out to the prospect a day or two later, not as soon as you jump off, but a day or two later and saying, hey, Jen, it sounds like you had a good meeting with me and Brandon yesterday. Looking forward to getting back together next week. I wanted to see if you had about 5 minutes between now and next week. I'd love to give you a quick call. There's something I just wanted to pick your brain on. Don't ask to prospect, but just say, hey, I just want to pick your brain on something before our meeting next week.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with following up and scheduling that.
Well, it's a lot of what we were talking about before around strategy, intentionality, coming in and purpose. And, nobody is going to care about your business as much as you do. So some great suggestions there about how you can get ahead of that before you go into the meeting. And then you're like, the meeting's over and what just happened?
Yep.
One of the key things that I suggest for all advisors is always thinking about kind of what is your lead generation plan? And by that, we mean, where are you going to get business this year? And if you think about maybe joint work as one of those key avenues for you where you want to build that, is what is your goal from that? So really get specific. Do you want to see 10% of your business from that this year? Or what does that look like for you? Because then just like you think about, how many phone calls do you need to make or how many fact finders you need to have? It's the same thing. You can work backwards and think about, how do I be really intentional with those partners that I have to get me where I want to go? And then everybody's on the same page. So if you didn't get your question answered or you're watching this on the replay and have some questions, you can reach out to me at jennifer@playmakercoach.com. And I'm sure Brandon and myself will get back to you. I know Brandon does a lot of coaching with younger advisors as well. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure he'd be happy to share more about what that looks like as well. As we wrap things up, Brandon, we always like to support an organization that you're passionate about. What's a nonprofit cause that we can help support as being our guest on today's conversation?
Well, we're really big on pediatric cancer research. So the Alex's Lemonade Stand is just something that we still support every single year. We've had some family members affected by that. And Northwestern Mutual Chicago, as well as nationally, is a big supporter of that. So
well, I know everybody's very familiar with that. Yeah, we love to be able to continue to support that and to help prevent more situations where families have to deal with that. Resources for this week, if you're looking for an idea or two or somebody to help you create a marketing system and put these things into place, next step I would suggest is reaching out either to me or you can request your personalized digital marketing checkup. You can scan the QR code. It'll get you to all my contact information with the link to the YouTube link, as well as where you can go on our website where it's playmakercoach.com/checkup. And we'll make sure to put that in the notes as well. And you can request that. We'll provide some customized recommendations for you on how you can continue to elevate your brand presence. We'll also send out the recording for those that registered and just weren't able to attend live. Remember Brandon's try it at work tip to look at your production leaders. If you haven't done it in a while, see who's showing up at the top of the leaderboard and who are those, 1 to 3 key partners that you really want to be strategic about developing a relationship with. We'll be back in 2 weeks on April 3rd with advisor Irina McGrath out of the Denver office. She successfully transitioned her business from California to Colorado and has went the route of really building a team and utilizing her digital presence also to showcase the expertise that her team can bring and elevate her brand. So I think that's all the resources for today. Once again, thank you for your time, Brandon. It was great to learn a little bit more about your practice. Lots of great takeaways. and excited to continue to see what your firm does from here. And we will stay in touch and be back in 2 weeks with even more winning plays for your business. Thanks. Okay.